While names such as Gettysburg, Antietam, and Shiloh are familiar to many students of American history, most Americans would likely be unable to name a single naval battle from the American Civil War. Yet, naval actions played a very important role in the Civil War. Union and Confederate gunboats clashed on America's rivers, and Union ships blockaded the southern coast for several years during the war, forcing the Confederacy to rely on blockade runners and marauders to supply its armies and civilians. The war ushered in a new type of ship, the Ironclad, which in turn ushered in a new age of naval warfare. Nowhere was this new type of naval warfare on display more than at the Battle of Hampton Roads, fought on March 8th and 9th of 1862, where two ironclad ships met in battle and led the way into a new era of naval warfare. When the Civil War began in April 1861, the Union government in Washington decided to launch a blockade of the Confederacy, hoping that preventing ships from reaching southern ports would deprive the South of the materials it would need to fight and survive. In response, Southerners began building and developing ships to either fight the Union blockade or slip past it. Some of these ships were brand new in naval warfare. Rather than the traditional wooden ships, ships were now being developed with iron on the sides to protect them during battle, gaining the name Ironclads. These ships were also powered by steam, making them more mobile than traditional wooden warships. These ironclads, built and developed by both sides, changed how naval operations occurred during the Civil War and beyond. For the Confederacy, one of their leading ironclad ships was the CSS Virginia. The Virginia was built from the remnants of a destroyed Union ship, the USS Merrimack, and thus it is sometimes referred to as the CSS Merrimack. Confederate Secretary of the Navy Stephen Malloy was a proponent of developing and using new ironclad ships to defend the South, and the Virginia was a part of this effort. The Virginia was constructed in Richmond at the Tredegar Iron Works in the summer of 1861, and was officially launched and commissioned the CSS Virginia in February 1862. In the North, the Union government had an easier time building a fleet of ironclad ships. The North had significantly more industry than did the South, and thus the materials for making warships and maintaining them were easier to find. With the backing of Congress, Union Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles began developing these ironclads in August 1861, and the first one to be finished was the USS Monitor. The Monitor had a rather distinctive design. Most of the ship was flat and nearly level with the surface of the water, making it a difficult target to hit in battle. Most notable was the lone gun turret on the Monitor, which stuck out from the water and spun in order to fire on enemy ships. Once the CSS Virginia was launched, it went right to work at damaging the Union blockade. The Union's wooden warships were no match for the newly built and designed Confederate ironclad. On March 8, 1862, the Virginia entered the waters near Hampton Roads, Virginia, and engaged several Union warships that were a part of the blockade along the Virginia coast. Accompanied by several other Confederate vessels, a few of which were also ironclads, the Virginia soon did great damage to the Union fleet. The Virginia rammed the USS Cumberland, quickly sinking the ship, killing and wounding 150 sailors. The Virginia then pursued the USS Congress, eventually capturing the ship. For the CSS Virginia and the Confederate Navy, March 8, 1862 was a day of great successes. Perhaps the only drawback that day was when the Virginia's captain, Franklin Buchanan, was wounded by an exploding artillery shell, forcing Lieutenant Catesby Ap Roger Jones to take command and lead the ship for the rest of the battle at Hampton Roads. The following day, March 9th, when the Virginia resumed its attacks on the Union fleet, the USS Monitor was ready to engage its ironclad counterpart. The Monitor had arrived in Hampton Roads on the night of the 8th, and was ordered to protect the Union fleet off the coast. For several hours that day, the Monitor and the Virginia engaged in battle, firing directly into each other's iron sides. The armor which covered each ship protected them from the shells, meaning that neither ship gained an advantage over the other. The Virginia had been prepared to fight against wooden vessels, and thus did not have any shells capable of piercing the Monitor's armor. Conversely, the Monitor had guns capable of firing 15-pound shells, which were not enough to break through the Virginia's armor. When a shell exploded and temporarily blinded Lieutenant John Worden, the commander of the USS Monitor, the Monitor pulled back and disengaged. The battle between the Monitor and the Virginia had been a draw, but the Virginia had been stopped from further damaging the Union fleet. The Battle of Hampton Roads was over. For the next several weeks, each ship recovered from the engagement, and reinforcements arrived for both the Union and Confederate Navy. The Battle of Hampton Roads did not have a noticeable impact on the Union blockade, and Federal efforts to blockade the South continued. Hampton Roads had shown the power and ability of ironclad warships, essentially leading to a stalemate along the Virginia coast for the time being. In May, however, events transpired that ended the standoff along the Virginia coast altogether. On May 9th, the Confederate Army abandoned Norfolk, Virginia, where the CSS Virginia was located. Because the ship was too large to move up the James River to the safety of Richmond, the decision was made to destroy the vessel, rather than allowing it to fall into the hands of the Union Navy. Thus, 2 months after the famous ironclad Battle of Hampton Roads, the CSS Virginia was destroyed. The USS Monitor outlasted the Virginia, though not for long. In December 1862, the Monitor was ordered to Beaufort, North Carolina, to strengthen the Union blockade along the Carolina coast. While moving down the coastline towards North Carolina, a powerful storm overtook the Monitor. Because of its unique design, high waves overcame the ship, forcing most of the crew to leave for the safety of other ships in the fleet. On December 31st, 1862, the Monitor sank, taking 16 crew members with her. While these ships did not fight again after the Battle of Hampton Roads, the fight was still important because it was a key moment in changing naval warfare. For the first time, 2 ironclad vessels fought for hours on end on the ocean, showing how naval tactics would evolve during the years of the Civil War. The Monitor and the Virginia, with their armored sides, were but the first of many more ironclad ships to come. Confederate ironclads would attempt to break through the Union blockade, and Union ironclads destroyed Confederate blockade runners on the ocean and did damage to Confederate river forts on the inland waterways of the Confederacy. Clearly, the USS Monitor, the CSS Virginia, and the Battle of Hampton Roads signaled a new age of naval warfare, giving them an importance beyond the Civil War itself, and thus earning the distinction of the most famous naval battle of the American Civil War.